Crikey, David showed me this the other day, and we talked it through at other sessions as well. And I didn't quite appreciate the complexity of getting from purpose to strategy, and then cascading that through many different organisations.
Mm.
I'll just kick off with it's open season now, folks, to start asking stuff here. But for me, David, the challenge there, one of the big principles is around clarity of purpose to enable us to turn that into a strategy that an organisation can then follow. And it looked like in that last diagram you showed, there were a number of different organisations and a number of different influences on purpose.
Mm.
Um, so to come up with a strategy that's influenced by purposes, that must be difficult. How would you what do you think of that?
Well, yes, the connection from purpose and strategy down to actually delivery is even more complicated than that, really. The main way you get things done, such as building a new railway station or really any improvements to services, is building a business case for them. And as part of that, as part of the general government model of business cases, you have to devise what's called a strategic case, where you show how the improvement you want to make aligns with other people's strategies. But it can be anybody's strategy, really. It can be the national government strategy, local government strategy, industry-related strategy that something like the Rail Freight Operators Consortium might have come up with. You show that what you want to do meets a need. Then you do a value for money to show that the benefits justify the costs, and then you apply for funding. And then the funding sources are numerous as well. So there's national government pots, local government organisations have their own funding pots. So you're having multiple purposes fight it out for multiple pots of money. And it does just sort of what happens in the end does just sort of emerge at the moment. There's no other way of describing it, really.
Um, I will ask questions unless anyone else wants to dive in.
I wouldn't mind diving in. I thought that's actually really interesting, David, what you were explaining about all the purposes of the multiple organizations, because most often I would deal just with a single organization that has a single purpose, although multiple business units or operational areas, they should all align to that one purpose. I think that's enormous complexity to try and pull that all together into a purpose that everybody can get behind.
Yes, and if you look down at the local level, it gets more complicated even. I mean, the railway industry is often in the news and quite often for the wrong reasons, projects being cancelled and so on. So something like High Speed 2, which is we've been wrestling with for 15 years, I mean, that started off as the government just saying, we think this would be a great idea and we will fund it. And they set up the organisation to start developing and say they're going to fund it all out of their own pocket. But if you get down to things like an improvement at a particular station, it may be that that's arisen from purely local factors. It might even be in the private sector that property developers are looking at, say, a shopping opportunity. They think that near a railway station would be a good place to put some a retail park or something, because there's lots of people passing that way. And they may even put up some funding themselves to improve walking routes around a station. And then they'll get local government involved, and then we'll start talking to the train operators, and they'll say, oh, well, yes, we've had a problem with such and such a station. Actually, it's not strictly compliant with this or that law on accessibility for disabled people and so on. So we need to improve that station anyway for those reasons. And you get a whole group of people come together, and they might all put a bit of the funding in, and they do have their own priorities as what the most important thing out of that project would be. So, I mean, we also so there's the funding and the accountability. From my point of view, trying to coordinate what our priorities across the whole of the North are. For me, the problem is information often. Actually, information on what currently exists in the way of facilities at railway stations can be years out of date. So there's problems with that aspect of it as well. So yeah, it's all very complicated at the moment.
I'd love to ask another question, but I'll give somebody else a go before I totally dominate it.
I've got one that might be relevant. David, it feels like much of the demand that's coming into rail for investment is almost bottom up. It's like people seeing an opportunity and looking to seek funds and somehow try to relate an opportunity to a strategic objective. Is there a map somewhere that maps out? You're talking about the infrastructure itself, but is there a map that lays out how the purposes that the whole organization has, how that maps to strategic objectives and then cascades into the respective projects, programs, asset developments, operational elements that are in the rail industry? How would you say that? How well do you say that is mapped? Because you said information that helps you make decisions is your challenge. I'm sensing that mapping is a challenge as well, then.
Yes, well, I mean, it's only from the perspective of particular organisations that clearly exists. I mean, I've been talking about the industry as a whole, and if you want to look at diagrams about how that's supposed to work, well, now's the right time because the Railways Bill was just announced on the 5th of November is now going to go through Parliament as to what the government thinks the current situation is and how they want to change it. And so that's all on the Department for Transport's website. There's loads of information about how they think it operates now, and it's all up for discussion, and MPs are going to have to say on it over the coming months. So we're only 3 weeks into that parliamentary process. From the point of view of Network Rail as it exists, though, as I said, they were moving from this sort of outsourcing stroke emerging strategy idea that Railtrack had of how they would operate. Network Rail has very much moved towards a much more centralised organisation, and they, like Starlin, they work in 5-year plans, and they have a very rigid business planning process of trying to find out from government what it expects, and then how many funds will be available, and then going through a process of filtering to decide which enhancement projects they're going to focus on. So the government would give something which was called the high-level output statement to Network Rail, and saying the railway industry of the UK has to do these various things, and that would say stuff like there's got to be at least 2 trains an hour from King's Cross to Edinburgh. It would be very important, and then various other frequencies between major cities, and then they'd also say, and you have to be able to associate a certain number of thousand commuters going into each major city centre in Britain every day. So you'd be given those big criteria, but then after that, Network Rail would be given the freedom to work out, well, exactly how are we going to meet that? And then they'd run all the timetabling and investment programs in parallel, and then you get down to the level of an individual enhancement or renewal project that was intended to contribute towards something like that. So from their perspective, it is all a very rigid sort of planning process. But that's what we're trying to sort of move away from in a way now, and bring in more of this local knowledge and get local government to come in and say, well, actually, our local priority is this. Could you give this a bit more attention?
So even more debate as to what purposes are, local purposes starting to stir in and to affect prioritisation of objectives, or at least choices around which objectives get which amounts of funding.
Yeah, one I should mention when we're on it, I've mentioned accessibility, sort of for disability rights and equality and so on. Another aspect of that is something called transport-related social exclusion, which we're working on, which is actually trying to bring areas which currently have very poor transport links in and give people there more access to job opportunities and things like that. That's something we haven't really had a mechanism for doing in the past, but it's something that local politicians are obviously quite keen on.
I've got a whole string of questions, but folks, as Lisa said, has anyone else got any?
There's a few hands up there. I can see Tim and Gregor have got hands up, I think.
Gregor first, maybe.
Yeah. I as a Canadian, I'm not close to the rail system, but I guess my question is governance design primarily the responsibility of the British government over the whole of the rail system? I'm a bit confused about how much of this is driven by taxpayer money versus capitalist logic and instincts. It seems to me I actually knew the guy that was appointed at one point to be the head of HR for British Mail, and it appears that there's a lot of parallels between your rail situation and the way things are going with mail, parcel delivery, how the private sector dances with government. I mean, is it the government that's designing the governance strategy for the whole of the rail system?
Well, in a word, yes. I mean, I think the general culture in Britain is we expect government to sort the railway industry out. And when you get down to the specifics, that most of the railway lines operate at a loss, and nobody thinks there's much chance they ever will do anything otherwise. So it's all subsidised by the government. So that route I discussed earlier, the railway line from London to Birmingham, Manchester, and Glasgow, is loss making, and so they've had to pay companies to take the franchise and run the services. The only major one which makes a profit is the East Coast Main Line, which is from London to Leeds, York, and Edinburgh. That makes a profit on operating, and so companies paid the government for the privilege of running that, so that they could take the properties. But overall, it's loss making, and so it's seen as a government thing to subsidise.
Okay, thank you.
I think Greg has got his hand up there as well.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I'm a PMO consultant trying to help organizations to level up PMOs, let's say from process-driven to value-driven. And we are going towards strategy definition and realization instead of focusing on project management tools and so. And my question is for both speakers. On one side, how do you see the PMO fits in the this strategy management book of knowledge, and related to the BIC also, and how do you see it also from the perspective of praxis of the railway industry? Mainly, I'm trying to understand how much does this strategy approach gives or helps to close the strategy to execution gap, and who are the teams who can handle this most efficiently? Are we trying to make strategy teams more work on the governance and portfolio management in that case, or are we trying the execution teams like project world leveling up to portfolio and governance to connect and close the gap?
Probably both, if I can answer that. Probably both. And I think one of the realizations is that strategy in an organization is not just about this. It's not just about two things. It's not just about the formulation and articulation of the strategy, and it's also not about an elite or select group that will be responsible and will lead it, and then that's it. So each organization needs to find its own way of joining into doing this. The other second way round, if you like, is that I think we've heard in some of the other webinars that I've done with David as well, that the feedback that people undertaking projects or the management portfolio, there is a lack of connection between understanding where their projects fit into the strategy, or that connection gets lost very quickly during the implementation. So those connections need to be reinforced. And I think the whole, if you like, the whole value of this sort of discussion and this initiative and bringing it together is to highlight the realization that you have to have those connections. You have as an organization to build those connections to make sure the understanding occurs and the flows of information both ways so that people understand how it fits in. So in answer to your question from I'll leave David to answer about the rail industry, but in answer to your connection, it's increasingly important that those that are responsible for strategy in an organization and the leaders within that realize that connection is not just about that. Strategy is no good without implementation, without understanding, without engagement. And vice versa, if you're undertaking a project and such like, you have to continually make sure that you have that understanding about how it fits, how it contributes, how it's progressing the organization's strategy, and how it can change it if things change as well, how it can influence it. So that pipeline, that infrastructure that I think Big brings a very useful perspective on, is a real way of helping to make those connections work.
That's great. So to make it clear, do you see strategy management body of knowledge providing to close this gap and provide this communication connection, or big body of knowledge? Or maybe you see that we really need to talk about something not about PMOs, but maybe strategy delivery offices, strategy delivery teams, which connect all the worlds from strategy to project management under one roof, one team, which knows about how the execution goes and knows about the resources and etc., and can give the means for the decisions for strategy level. So is body of knowledge providing all needed connections, or we need really to talk about strategy delivery teams,
I think
offices, whatever?
I think there are three levels, Gregor. Just very, very quickly, as David Worsley's indicated, there need to be teams within organisations that are strategically thinking, looking long term, doing analysis, and coming up with the patterns of demand, all that sort of stuff. So there's a strategy development at a high level. There's a group of people that think for the business like that. There's also the PMO teams making projects work, making programs work, focusing on the delivery. My perspective is there's a gap in the middle, and there's the gap in the middle. I quoted the response from the PMO conference where nobody knew who was supporting the connection of strategy delivery. So I think that's a gap. And what I think there's a further gap on is because strategy delivery isn't just about projects and programs. We've got to align our business as usual performance and our products and asset development as well. There's a function I think that we needs to balance across business as usual, product and asset creation and change. So for me, there's three levels of support function. Maybe it's one, but three. The support function, which helps the organization think. The organization that's very close to that, which helps the organization work out how that can get operated in the business. And then the support function, which enables delivery to happen. And what can a PMO become that middle layer? Why not? A sophisticated PMO, why can't it step up to the connection of strategy to delivery? And maybe take its position as the change portfolio leg and offer out support wider to the BAU performance and product development legs. I don't know how that works in the rail scenario, DW, but
yes,
that's the big pitch. That's the big pitch.
Well, as I said, we've gone through a sort of cycle where we've gone from being very centralised to decentralised, and the governance has evolved in line with that. So, in the early days of Network Rail, when they were trying to get costs under control and improve the safety culture, with it being such a huge organisation, they did have whole teams of people in PMOs and so on working on internal governance, and people told them they had to get a grip on the railway industry, and they actually came up with a manual called GRIP, Governance of Rail Investment Projects. And that's what we all worked to. But the feeling was eventually that it was getting over bureaucratic and had become an impediment to delivering things. So now Network Rail's moved on to something called PACE instead, which is projects accelerated in a controlled environment, which is a bit more of a flexible project management system. And I think that's more suitable for this new world we're moving into of responding to local customers and local concerns as part of the strategy. So the governance of both strategy and projects has evolved in the sort of wider political context.
That's
Folks,
great. Awesome.
McGregor, did you have a comeback on that?
Yeah, that's
Did we
great.
answer your
Awesome.
question?
I agree. We need to level up from just trying to do the project the best way to do and focus to the right projects we want to do. And we have to do it in the streamlined way so that it's effective and efficient at the end of the day.
Diana's made an interesting comment as well. We've put our PMO and strategy departments equal both reporting to one director. So it helps with information sharing and regular implementation plans. That makes sense. That's a very big thing to do to combine those two functions, at least we've put them under the COO perhaps, but you're getting the people thinking about strategy creation and strategy delivery all mixed together. So from a portfolio management perspective, I think there's a really big contribution for portfolio management within this is a portfolio of investments, a portfolio of changes, and we'll chat to Stephen Jenner about that in a couple of weeks. But it's really the challenge I see is the balance, not just between projects, but between change and achieving business performance and delivering our assets. There's that balancing act needs to do, which PMOs don't typically get stuck into. I don't know if anyone here is from a PMO that does get into product and asset management as well as business as usual operational performance oversight. But that to me is the challenge, I think, with strategy connection. It's not just projects in my view. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. It doesn't go strategy projects. There's a huge amount of work between the strategy, if you want to think about it at the corporate level, and the projects that get implemented. And just something that stands out to me is, and I think we've been chatting about it a bit in the chat, is the level of collaboration required between corp strat and projects to get all the great thinking brains within an organization together to devise what it is that actually needs to happen, taking all these critical domain expertise and experts and visions, subvisions of their own, if you like, into account. The last thing you want is to have projects that get specified or not specified, but projects that get created, and then somebody from somewhere comes and puts a spanner in the works. But it's not easy to get that collaboration and input. And I mean, sometimes you feel like you're pulling the whole organization together just to go from corp strat into what are we actually going to do.
And if corp strategy means you've got to spend a year or two focusing on operational performance to get the business performance stats back up, that may mean you slow down some change in investment initiatives. So how can you steer that change in strategic priority if you don't have a function that looks across projects, product management, and business as usual objectives.
Exactly.
Yeah, there are whole aspects to of this which we've only barely touched on so far as well. Which I mean, one of the things I'm interested in at the moment very much is information management. So it's not so much about who's making the decisions and what decisions they're making, is just trying to make sure everyone's got the best information when they make them. Is something we're putting a lot of effort into. As I say, some of the information that people are making decisions in the railway industry on can be years out of date. And so we're just trying to improve the information flow, that so whenever decisions are made, that they're made with the best available information. We're hoping that will improve the efficiency of everything. That doesn't need big corporate or organisational or governance changes. It just means people to have better information.
How do you say the operationalization of that information is, David? Because it feels like, so I've heard people talk about assurance activity that can take 4 or 5 weeks to pull together a good picture of the assurance position on a major program. And if your information takes a long time to get together and you don't really know where it's come from and you don't know really who's provided it, you can have the data, you can look at it in a nice document, but if you don't know the validity and source and ownership of that stuff, how traceable would you say that information is through the rail scenario you've described?
In the railway industry, it's because of its size and complexity. The answer is not very sometimes, and as well as not necessarily knowing who's provided the information. In some cases, the people believe that information is confidential that isn't, and you're trying to get hold of things, and people say, "Oh, this is our business information. We can't really just go around sharing this with everybody." But it turns out that it's not, and because everything's nationalised now anyway in the industry, people are supposedly we're all working for the same overall body, but you still don't actually have that culture of openness necessarily. So it's just at the moment it's a nightmare, which is why we're looking at ways to improve that.
Well, that to me is a key aspect of the big scenario is to have a good information and data scenario that you can trace and connect and see come together. But Tim, you very politely put your hand up.
Yeah, having worked with all levels of government, from municipal, provincial, national, and in a variety of countries, I guess listening to the discussion, it strikes me that my own conclusion after 40 years is governments, from the political perspective, want to look like they take credit for strategy, but don't want any accountability for execution. So when you look at the system that you've been describing, if we look at it from a 50,000-foot level, isn't the biggest problem that the governance infrastructure over spending on rail, period, across the whole of the country is fundamentally flawed? That's just an observation. We share similar problems here in Canada with our Canada Post, and my understanding is the Royal Mail has similar problems. But as I watch politicians, and I look at the efforts in Canada to try and build governance into government, it goes back to the central thesis of the book that I'm just finishing. I just got it in full draft. So the don't tell, don't ask syndrome is a root message in my book, which says the people running all of these little bits of this rail system don't want to tell the truth, and the people that are supposed to oversight it, they don't want to ask because the information won't look good.
Well, yes. I mean, if you go back to the where I started my presentation with Railtrack and its relationship with government and its customers and all its contractors, it was basically in that sort of situation where the government had split what had previously been one company, British Rail, It was split into over 100 different companies at the time of privatisation, without really all the necessary thought being given about information flow and transparency. And in a way, it's taking us now 30 years to recover from that. First of all, they've gone for the simple solution of trying to centralise everything, and now we're sort of trying to work out exactly how much decentralisation we need again, so that we can get some of the good ideas from the original privatisation in the 90s without the downside. But it's a very difficult balance to strike, and you've hit the nail on the head with it's about the incentives that people have to share information, and if they don't actually have any incentives to share information, or worse, they've got incentives to not share information, then you're building big problems into the system. So that's what we're trying to think about at the moment, really.
Highly likely the system you just described is fully operational.
Yes.
Folks, we are over time, so I don't want to disrespect anybody's time availability. But if anyone has any more questions, we can certainly discuss them. I would be interested to see how the big elements of the rail industry stacked up against sort of big principles of having clarity of purpose, effective cascade of objective, a clarity of accountability, capability for data collection and information validity to support accountability, governance and assurance. I'd love to probe that, and that could be a very long conversation. Does anybody else have anything else to ask or comment on before we wrap up? Okay, then I shall do my wrap up and thank everyone. And if there are further questions that follow after that, we can certainly take them. Can everyone see my screen okay? So we certainly could talk about how the big principles, you'll find this in the body of knowledge, relate to the scenario we just discussed. So the connection of purpose to strategy and purpose into objectives, we've discussed that. The clarity of the governance infrastructure and how that was built as an operating model and was systemic and systematic. The place of accountability in that and the clarity of accountability. Maybe this goes back to Gregor's point, but the positioning of a support infrastructure and leadership of that infrastructure to enable the governance to happen, that's underpinned by reliable, traceable information that's fit for purpose and usable, which supports independent assurance to make sure the governance is working effectively. So we could certainly spend an hour probing that. But please look at the bot for this. We can go into it some more. But just to wrap up, thank you to David and David for preparing. David Booth for giving us the introduction to ISP, if we haven't already got it, and to stimulate us as to how we can be agile with a dynamic approach to strategy delivery. Please, if you're interested, find out more about the ISP. There's a UK chapter and there's some links in the next page. Have a look at BIG as that framework that can connect the strategists to the delivery folks and enable that strategy delivery to be operated and managed. That certainly is something we're talking about. And you use the collateral we've provided to discuss first steps with your organisation. What are your challenges? So we've been probing David Worsley's scenario in the rail about what are the issues possibly there, but what are the issues in your organisation? Can you get consensus and agreement to do something? Our contact details are there if you want to speak to David or follow up with David Worsley about the case example. David Booth has written Strategy Journeys, which is I've read it, I've reviewed it. If you haven't got nothing in your library with respect to strategy delivery, then start there. And the ISP Body of Knowledge 2 is certainly worth getting into. But thank you guys for presenting. And I'll leave this on screen, but I'll also email this around. There's a selection of links here to Big for our content and membership. The ISP link is there. David's book on strategy journeys. The other event reports in this series that talk about Big, the examples of usage and how to get it on the exec agenda. And just let me signpost, Tim's presenting mission critical objectives and a stimulating session for next week. So please have a look at that. And Steve Jenner is going to talk to us about portfolio management and the investment and change perspective for the week after that. So basically, folks, as the big bunny would say, that's all, folks. Thank you for coming along and engaging. If you have any more questions, please chime up now. As I say, we'll write an event summary. We'll share the recording. I'll answer some of the questions in the chat. But yeah, folks, thanks for coming. And yeah, back over to you. If nothing else to say, I'll close it down.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Cheers. Bye.
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
David, you're on twice.
It was, yeah.
I'll just stop the recording if I can do that. How do I do that? Can do that. It's got to press the right button. Recording, stop recording.